They didn't fire me. That would have caused questions. Meetings. Noise. Instead, they cut my salary almost in half, quietly, clinically, just days after our platform crossed $1 billion in projected valuation. The email arrived at 6:08 a.m., wrapped in polite HR language and empty phrases about realignment. By the time I finished reading it, the city outside my window was already waking up. Cars moved. People rushed to work. The world carried on, completely unaware that something foundational had just been taken from me. But long before that email, before Virion Labs, before boardrooms and demos and polished investor decks, I was just a woman in a freezing basement apartment with a second-hand laptop and a belief that refused to die. I didn't have capital. I didn't have connections. I had instant noodles stacked beside my desk, a ceiling that leaked when it rained, and a mind that couldn't stop noticing how broken modern data systems had become. Every company I studied was building artificial intelligence the same way. Extract more. Track more. Predict more. Manipulate behavior, monetize attention, sell certainty to advertisers while calling it innovation. I wanted no part of that. I believed intelligence could exist without surveillance, that systems could learn without violating the people they were built to serve. That belief kept me awake night after night, sketching logic flows on a cracked whiteboard, rewriting models that failed, starting over when shortcuts tempted me. That was how Lumen Core began. Quietly, slowly, line by line. A predictive engine that didn't rely on invasive tracking. No shadow profiles. No hidden data scraping. Just mathematics, intent, and time. It wasn't elegant at first, but it worked. The model learned patterns without stealing identities, adapted without crossing ethical lines. I tested it obsessively, breaking it on purpose, rebuilding it stronger each time. For months, no one knew it existed. Then, one Friday afternoon, a message appeared on my screen. Claire. Call me when you see this. Nora Whitman. I hadn't spoken to Nora since we graduated from MIT. She was brilliant in a way that made rooms go quiet, the kind of engineer who remembered who helped her at 3 a.m. when systems failed and deadlines burned. I assumed she was busy, successful, far removed from the world I was living in. She was calling from inside it. When we finally spoke, her voice was sharp with urgency. She told me she was leading back-end architecture at a fast-growing startup called Virion Labs. Funded. Ambitious. Under pressure. They were racing to build an AI platform investors could believe in without crossing ethical red lines that were starting to scare regulators. I told them about your system, she said. There was a pause. The CEO wants to meet you. I laughed. Before I could stop myself. Me? I hadn't seen sunlight in 3 days. My laptop bag was torn at the seam. But I cleaned myself up, zipped the broken side shut, and showed up anyway. Virion's office was everything my apartment wasn't. Open space. Brick walls. Glass conference rooms filled with whiteboards covered in ideas that hadn't yet hardened into reality. They didn't have a finished product. They had a narrative, momentum, and money waiting for direction. That's when Evan Cross, the CEO, leaned forward in his chair and said, "You've built something rare. Let's scale it." For the first time in months, I felt it. Hope. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The team moved fast, talked faster. Everyone acted like time was running out. Coffee cups everywhere. Late nights normalized. I was brought on as a temporary consultant at first, a trial phase, Evan called it. But his behavior told a different story. He'd stop by my desk, nod approvingly, casually mention how excited the board was about my work. 3 days later, he asked me into the conference room. He slid a folder across the table. Your full-time offer. The salary was generous. Stock options. A polished title, Director of Cognitive Systems. It looked like everything I had worked toward. But something felt incomplete. I flipped through the pages slowly. There was no mention of intellectual property. No clause about prior inventions. No clarity on ownership. I hesitated. Evan smiled, calm, practiced. Something wrong? I don't see anything about IP, I said carefully. Who owns what I built before this? He chuckled, as if I'd asked something naive. Ideas are cheap, Claire. Execution is what matters. This company is where your work becomes meaningful. He said it kindly, reassuringly. And in that moment, I wanted to believe him. So I signed. But that night, alone in my apartment, I opened my old hard drive. Every version of Lumen Core. Every commit. Every timestamp. I checked them twice. Then I logged into the US Patent Office and filed the application. Claire Donovan. Sole inventor. Privacy First Adaptive Intelligence Model. At 11:59 p.m., I hit submit. Trust is powerful. Trust with a backup plan is survival. Hope carried me through the front doors of Virion Labs. After months of isolation, of talking to myself and my code, I was suddenly surrounded by people again. Fast thinkers. Sharp talkers. The kind of ambition that buzzes in the air and makes you believe you're standing at the center of something important. The team was young, relentless, caffeinated. Everyone moved like they were racing an invisible clock. Desks blurred into each other, conversations overlapped, whiteboards were erased and rewritten in the same hour. For a while, it felt intoxicating. Like I had finally stepped into a place that didn't just want what I could build, but needed it. At first, I was everywhere. Product syncs. Architecture reviews. Late-night war rooms when simulations failed and investors demanded answers. People listened when I spoke. Not out of politeness, but because the system responded to my voice. I understood its behavior in ways no one else did. Lumen Core wasn't just code. It was instinct, reinforced. Through thousands of small decisions no slide deck could explain. Evan made a point of reinforcing that image. He'd drop by meetings unexpectedly, praising our breakthrough model, reminding everyone how rare it was to have true ethical intelligence at the core of a scalable platform. He called me foundational. Said the board loved my vision. But something subtle began to shift. When planning meetings were scheduled, my name sometimes appeared late on the invite. When product timelines were discussed, my objections were acknowledged, then quietly overridden. Nothing overt. Nothing that could be challenged directly. Just small adjustments. Minor exclusions. Easy to dismiss if you didn't want to see them. I told myself I was imagining it. The first real fracture appeared around the demo. Virion's debut at the Global Tech Forum was being framed internally as our moon landing. A chance to prove we weren't just another AI company chasing valuation. I worked 12-hour days refining the model, tightening feedback loops, optimizing performance under live load. I helped shape the technical narrative for the pitch deck because no one else could translate the math without turning it into fiction. When the internal speaker list circulated, my name wasn't on it. I assumed it was a mistake. A logistics oversight. Someone would fix it. No one did. So I attended anyway. I took a seat in the back row of a massive conference hall, lights dimmed, air cold, filled with venture capitalists, journalists, and executives who decided futures with raised eyebrows and crossed arms. The Virion logo flooded the screen. Evan walked on stage, confident, relaxed, polished into something almost rehearsed. He spoke about ethics, responsibility, intelligence without exploitation. The audience leaned in. Cameras flashed. Then he introduced Lydia Park, head of product. She stood beside him, laser pointer in hand, and began explaining the system. My system. Slide after slide appeared. Architectural flows. Behavioral diagrams. Visual frameworks I had drawn alone at my kitchen table months earlier, rewriting them until my hands cramped. The logic, the constraints, the adaptive layers. All of it presented as if it had emerged fully formed from the company itself. My name was nowhere. I sat frozen, fingers curled tight around the conference badge at my chest. Applause erupted at each transition. The room hummed with approval. Something inside me fractured, quietly, without drama. I wanted to leave, but my body refused to move. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Nora. A single image. It was a screenshot of the original internal slide deck. My name was clearly printed in the bottom corner of every page. I didn't know they were going to do that, she wrote. I'm sorry. They hadn't just taken credit. They had erased me. When Evan closed the presentation, he gestured vaguely at the screen. This, he said, smiling, is what happens when brilliant teams work together. I didn't clap. I didn't cry. I walked out into the lobby and stood there, breathing shallow, realizing something I had been avoiding since the contract signing. This was never my team. The email arrived the next week. 6:08 a.m. Again. No greeting. No call. No explanation. Just sanitized language buried inside HR phrasing. Due to internal restructuring, your compensation has been realigned to reflect evolving operational priorities. Effective immediately, my base salary was reduced by 42%. The company had crossed $1 billion valuation milestone the night before. My model powered it. I reread the email 3 times, then stared at the ceiling of my apartment, waiting for anger, panic, anything. Nothing came at first. Just silence. A dull pressure behind my eyes. I went to the office anyway. Maybe it was an error. A misfire. A system glitch. No one said a word when I walked in. No awkward glances. No apologies. The world moved on as if nothing had changed. At the weekly all-hands, Evan stood at the microphone, smiling like a general after victory. He spoke about discipline. About investing resources where they created scalable value. There was applause. Laughter. Motivation wrapped in confidence. No mention of cuts. No mention of names. Later that afternoon, Nora sent me another message. A photo this time. The rooftop. Champagne. Custom banners. Smiling faces. The engineering team was celebrating a performance bonus milestone I had never heard about. Attached was a budget snapshot. I shouldn't have seen it. But it was clear. Budget reallocation source, Cognitive Systems, C. Donovan. They had taken my salary and turned it into a party. That was when the humiliation finally settled in. Not loudly. Not explosively. Just cold and precise. Like realizing you're standing in the rain. Alone, dressed for something that will never happen. I wasn't invisible. I was disposable. The meeting stopped soon after. My calendar emptied itself. At first, I thought it was a sync issue. I refreshed. Logged out. Logged back in. Nothing. Invitations vanished. Threads turned read-only. Conversations I had once led now continued without me. When I asked IT about my access, the response was barely a sentence. Security policy updates. That afternoon, I listened to an all-hands meeting from the stairwell, through a cracked conference room door. They discussed roadmap changes without once asking where I was. No confrontation. No explanation. Just removal. Slow. Surgical. Complete. That night, I stayed late. The floor was nearly empty. The hum of the building felt unfamiliar now. I opened my laptop out of habit and checked system logs. Access denied. My phone buzzed. Nora, are you okay? Before I could respond, another message appeared. They changed your privileges. But your old dev token might still be active. From the sandbox phase. She attached a system log export. A month of backend behavior. CPU spikes. Model calls. API chains. All running on my original framework. They hadn't rebuilt anything. They had just locked me out. And for the first time since the pay cut, something else surfaced beneath the exhaustion. Clarity. The building felt different once you realize you no longer belong to it. I sat alone at my desk long after most of the lights had dimmed, listening to the low mechanical hum of a company that was still profiting from my existence while pretending I had vanished. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was calculated. A system designed to make you doubt yourself without ever saying your name. I opened the log file Nora had sent again. Timestamps. Load distribution. Behavioral inference cycles. Every critical function was still alive. Every core decision layer still ran on Lumen Core. No refactor. No replacement. No alternative engine hidden beneath the surface. They hadn't evolved past me. They had simply removed my face from the mirror. On instinct, I opened a hidden terminal and entered the old dev token Nora mentioned. I expected an error. A lockout. Something definitive. Instead, the admin panel loaded. Clean. Untouched. Familiar. I was inside the system I'd been told I no longer had access to. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The sensation was surreal. Like standing in a room you helped build, watching strangers rearrange the furniture and insist you were never there. The algorithms responded the same way they always had. Predictable in their honesty. Indifferent to corporate politics. The truth was unavoidable now. Virion Labs didn't just benefit from my work. They depended on it. I leaned back in my chair as the weight of that realization settled. For weeks, I had let myself believe I was powerless. That Evans charm, the board's silence, and HR's language carried more authority than years of solitary work and foresight. I had been wrong. Later that night, back in my apartment, I turned off the lights and opened my laptop again. The city glowed faintly through the window. Traffic hummed. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Life continued. I opened a folder labeled Patent, Pending. Inside it sat the document I had filed months earlier, almost as an afterthought, driven by nothing more than unease. I clicked it open. There it was. U.S. Patent Number 79-442, B. Adaptive Behavioral Intelligence Model using Privacy-First Logic Layers Inventor, Claire Donovan Status, Granted Effective Date, 8 months prior. My pulse thudded in my ears. I read the document slowly, line by line, not because I needed to understand it, but because I needed to feel it. The language was clinical. Precise. Cold. But to me, it read like proof of existence. I scrolled further. Attached to the filing was my original disclosure email. Sent 3 days before I signed Virion's employment agreement. Included were early architecture diagrams, repository links, and timestamped commits. It wasn't just protection. It was a legal firewall. Everything I had built before walking into Virion belonged to me. Not the company. Not Evan. Not the board. Me. The illusion shattered cleanly. I wasn't trapped. I was waiting. The next morning, I didn't open my inbox. I didn't go into the office. I walked into an old co-working space across the river instead. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ambition left behind. Half the desks were empty. The other half occupied by people building something quietly, without applause. I claimed a corner table, plugged in my laptop, and placed the printed patent beside it. Then I made the first call. Marcus Hale answered on the third ring. He sounded exactly as I remembered from a privacy law seminar years earlier. Calm, thoughtful, dangerous in the way only people who understand systems truly are. You finally built something big, he said after I explained. They built an empire on it, I replied. I need to stop them from selling what isn't theirs. He didn't hesitate. Send me everything. By noon, we had a draft. 5 pages. No threats. No drama. Just facts. Violation of U.S. Patent 79-442, immediate cessation of use. Commercial exploitation without authorization. Cold legal gravity. But stopping Virion wasn't enough. I didn't want my work frozen in a courtroom. I wanted it alive. Evolving. Used the way it was meant to be used. So I made the second call. Dr. Evelyn Shore answered with cautious curiosity. She had once been Virion's chief research architect, removed quietly for being too academic. Too principled. Too slow for investors. We hadn't spoken in years. I'm calling as the legal owner of Lumen Core, I said. And I have a proposal. I laid everything out. The pay cut. The lockout. The logs. The patent. I showed her proof, not emotion. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she spoke softly. We've been circling this problem for months, she said. We couldn't match your system. Without crossing lines we refused to cross. What if you didn't have to? I asked. There was a pause. Then, I want full transparency. No black boxes. No shortcuts. Agreed. That was all it took. We outlined a plan that night. A new platform. Built ethically from the core up. My model, restructured. Her infrastructure team. Shared ownership. Clean governance. We named it Ethos Engine. That evening, Marcus sent the cease and desist to Virion's legal counsel. 2 hours later, Nora texted me one sentence. They just called an emergency board meeting. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. For the first time since that 6:08 a.m. email, I wasn't reacting. I was moving. The cease and desist landed at 7:04 a.m. sharp. Marcus sent it directly from his firm's server, stamped, referenced, and stripped of anything emotional. A clean PDF. Subject line, urgent, IP violation notice. Attached were the patent citation, the scope of infringement, and a deadline that allowed no room for interpretation. By 7:30, Virion Labs was on fire. I didn't need to be inside the building to feel it. Nora became my live feed. Messages arrived in fragments, each one tighter than the last. 7:42 a.m., Evan's office. Door just slammed shut. 8:03 a.m., legal pulled Lydia out of a product briefing. 8:27 a.m., client success froze 3 enterprise accounts. No guidance. I sat in a quiet cafe across the river, coffee cooling in front of me, watching fog slide between buildings that once felt untouchable. The skyline hadn't changed. The illusion had. At 9:15, my phone rang. It wasn't Evan. It was Julia Pike, Virion's general counsel. Polished voice. Controlled pacing. The kind of calm that only appears when panic is being actively managed behind it. Claire, she said, as if we were old friends. We'd like to resolve this amicably. I let her talk. She offered a consultancy agreement. A generous retainer. Flexible hours. Full attribution for original contributions. The words were chosen carefully, as if ownership could be reframed through vocabulary. When she paused, waiting for my response, I spoke evenly. You mean the work you denied I had any role in? Silence stretched longer than intended. Let's be reasonable, she finally said. Reasonable. I opened my laptop while she waited. I forwarded her follow-up email with attachments she already feared. Git commits. Timestamp diagrams. The granted patent. I CC'd Marcus, 2 IP enforcement specialists, a retired federal judge now in arbitration, and Carla Montez, whose reputation for dismantling tech giants was legendary. I ended the message with 3 words. See you soon. Then I hit send. Inside Virion, the reaction was immediate and visible. Promotional material vanished from their website by noon. Architecture claims softened into vague language. Proprietary became collaborative. Innovative became experimental. It wasn't enough. By early afternoon, 3 enterprise clients had formally paused all deployments pending clarification of the patent dispute. 2 requested written assurances that Virion even had the right to sell what it was selling. Evan tried to reassure the board. She wants a payout, he insisted. We'll settle. Rebrand, move forward. He was wrong. I didn't want money. I wanted the truth acknowledged. While Virion scrambled, Ethos Engine moved quietly. Evelyn and I worked without announcements, without press. Clean commits. Transparent documentation. Every architectural decision logged, reviewable, defensible. No shortcuts. No ambiguity. We built faster than Virion ever had, because we weren't lying to ourselves. By the time Virion's internal Slack channels filled with speculation and blame, our system was already stable under load. The launch event came together in weeks. The ballroom at the Conrad Hotel was packed. Investors. Analysts. Engineers who once ignored my emails. Every badge bore the logo of someone who had benefited from my silence. I stood just behind the curtain, lights warm against my skin. Fingers cold. On stage, the Ethos Engine logo glowed in restrained blue and silver. Beneath it, ethical intelligence, verifiably built. Evelyn opened with data, not hype. Performance metrics. Transparency audits. Compliance architecture. No theatrics. Just proof. Then she turned toward me. And now, she said, I'd like to introduce the original architect. The inventor of the framework that made this possible. Applause began softly, then grew. I stepped forward. The weight of it surprised me. Not the noise, but the release. Years of working unseen. Of being erased without confrontation. All of it lifted as I reached the podium. For a long time, I said, voice steady, I believed innovation required compromise. That if you wanted scale, you had to surrender control. Behind me, the screens shifted to live system performance. Ethos Engine running faster than anything Virion had ever produced, using a fraction of the resources. Zero data compromise. Full traceability. A murmur rippled through the room. In the front row sat Riley Grant, CTO of Vanta Systems. Once Virion's most prized client. He was already taking notes. During the break, a project manager rushed backstage, breathless. Vanta just signed, he said. Full migration. Effective immediately. $14 million. Evelyn met my eyes. They came for the ethics, she said quietly. They stayed for the speed. The press followed. Headlines softened into inevitability. Analysts reframed narratives they had once ignored. 3 months later, the acquisition closed. Atlas Neural absorbed the remains of Virion Labs in what the media called a strategic consolidation. We called it correction. I stepped into the elevator of Virion's old building, now ours, and rode to the top floor. Evan's former domain. Polished concrete. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view that once symbolized distance. Now it was simply perspective. Theo, our project manager, approached hesitantly. Security says Evan Cross is downstairs, he said. He's asking to speak with you. 5 minutes. I considered it. Then shook my head. No, as Theo turned to leave, I stopped him. Actually, I said. Tell him something. Theo waited. I smiled, gently. Tell him his compensation has been realigned. Theo nodded, understanding everything. When the door closed, I turned back to the window. The city moved on. Deals closed. New empires formed. Old ones dissolved quietly. On the shelf behind me sat 2 framed documents. My original patent. And the latest filing. Ethos Engine, Adaptive Ethical Framework version 2.1 inventors, Claire Donovan and Evelyn Shore honor restored. 3 months after the Ethos Engine launch, the top floor of the former Virion Labs building no longer felt haunted. It felt earned. The acquisition paperwork was finished. Atlas Neural had absorbed what remained of Virion in record time, not as a hostile takeover, but as a necessity. The press called it a strategic merger. Analysts called it inevitable. Inside the building, no one used either phrase. They called it survival. I stepped out of the elevator onto the 35th floor, once Evan Cross's kingdom. The same floor where my salary had been reduced to a line item. Where my name had been removed. Without explanation. Now it was quiet, open, and deliberately unfinished. No oversized desks. No power statements carved into architecture. Just space designed to be used, not worshipped. My name was on the glass door. Claire Donovan, co-founder, Ethos Engine. It still surprised me how little satisfaction came from that alone. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because meaning had shifted. Titles mattered less when the system worked. When people trusted it. When it didn't need deception to scale. Behind me, the floor filled slowly. Engineers settling in. Conversations starting. Real ones. Not the performative confidence of early-stage hype, but the steady rhythm of people building something they believed in. I moved to the window and looked out at the city. The skyline hadn't changed. The same towers. The same traffic. The same promises whispered from glass and steel. What had changed was my relationship to it. I no longer felt small beneath it, or eager to be accepted by it. I had already proven what I needed to prove. Theo appeared quietly at my side, holding a tablet. Final integration metrics are stable, he said. No dependency traces from Virion's old stack. We're clean. I nodded. Clean mattered. Not just legally, but psychologically. Also, he added carefully, Evan Cross is downstairs again. I didn't turn around. He's asking for 5 minutes, Theo continued. No lawyers. No recording. Just a conversation. I considered it longer this time. Not because I owed him anything. But because closure, when chosen freely, can be useful. Tell him no, I said. Theo hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. He nodded and stepped away. I stayed by the window as the building settled into its new identity. The hum of systems. The quiet confidence of infrastructure doing exactly what it was designed to do. Later that afternoon, I walked past the conference room where Evan had once reassured me that ideas were cheap. The room looked smaller now. Less impressive. Not because it had changed, but because I had. On the far wall hung a framed print of our architecture principles. Transparent. Auditable. Human respecting by design. They weren't slogans. They were constraints we welcomed. That evening, Evelyn joined me in my office. She carried 2 glasses and a bottle we'd been saving. To boring success, she said, pouring. I smiled. The best kind. We didn't talk about revenge. Or downfall. Or what Virion had lost. We talked about hiring. About regulation. About how to keep the system honest when scale inevitably tested it. Power, I'd learned, wasn't loud. It was maintained. As night fell, the city lights blinked on one by one. Somewhere below, Evan Cross exited a building that no longer belonged to him. Somewhere else, a startup pitched an idea that would never make it past due diligence. Somewhere, a young engineer stared at a blank screen, wondering if integrity had a future in this industry. I hoped she would find this story one day. Not as a fantasy. But as a reminder. That you don't have to scream to be heard. That you don't have to surrender ownership to be included. That patience, paired with preparation, outlasts charm every time. I reached for the shelf behind my desk. 2 frames stood there. The first, my original patent. Quiet. Unadorned. Filed when no one was watching. The second, Ethos Engine version 2.1. Signed by Evelyn and me. The result of choosing alignment over approval. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt complete. They had cut my salary. They had erased my name. They had tried to continue without me. But in doing so, they revealed something they never understood. You can remove a person from a company. You cannot remove ownership from the truth. And the truth, once documented, once defended, once rebuilt with intention, has a way of returning everything that was taken. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Permanently.